I've never told anyone this because every person I've told has either laughed or asked why I didn't call the police sooner. The truth is, by the time I realized something was wrong, it was already too late. About 2 years ago, I was driving across the state for work. It was almost midnight when I pulled into a small roadside motel just off the highway. The place wasn't abandoned, but it looked like it had been forgotten. Half the lights in the parking lot were burned out, and there were only 3 cars parked outside. The elderly man behind the front desk barely looked at me while checking me in. He slid a key across the counter and quietly said, "If you hear knocking after 2 a.m., don't answer it." I laughed because I thought he was joking. He didn't laugh back. My room was on the second floor, at the end of a long hallway. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. The room directly across from mine had dozens of tiny scratch marks around the doorknob, almost as if someone had repeatedly tried to claw their way inside. I took a picture because it looked strange. Around 1:30 a.m., I was watching videos on my phone when I heard slow footsteps outside my door. One step, pause, another step, then silence. I looked through the peephole. Nobody. I figured someone had gone downstairs, so I went back to bed. Exactly 20 minutes later, 3 slow knocks echoed through the room. Knock, knock, knock. I checked my phone. 2 a.m. I immediately remembered what the old man had said. For some reason, I didn't answer. Instead, I looked through the peephole again. There was a woman standing in the hallway. She wasn't facing my door. She was facing the wall, completely still. Her hair covered her face. After almost a minute, she slowly turned her head toward my door. I stepped away from the peephole before she could make eye contact. My heart was racing. Then my phone vibrated. It was a notification from the motel's Wi-Fi login page that had somehow reopened by itself. The network name read, "Look behind you." I spun around. Nothing. When I looked back through the peephole, the hallway was empty. I convinced myself someone nearby had renamed their hotspot as a prank. Around 3 a.m., I finally fell asleep. I woke up because someone was dragging something heavy across the floor outside. The sound moved slowly down the hallway, then stopped directly outside my room. I called the front desk. Nobody answered. I cracked my door open just enough to see outside. The hallway was empty, but something caught my attention. Every room number was visible except the one across from mine. Its number plate was missing. The door was slightly open. I don't know why, but curiosity got the better of me. I walked across the hallway and pushed the door wider. The room was completely empty. No bed, no furniture, no curtains, just bare walls, except for one old security monitor sitting on the floor. It was still powered on. The screen showed a live camera feed of the second-floor hallway. I looked at the monitor, then looked outside, then back at the monitor. On the screen, I could clearly see myself standing in the doorway. Behind me stood a tall man wearing a motel employee uniform. His face was turned toward the camera. I spun around. The hallway behind me was empty. I grabbed the monitor to check if it was delayed footage. It wasn't. On the screen, the man slowly raised one finger to his lips. Then he pointed toward my room. I ran back across the hallway. My room door was open. I was certain I'd closed it. Inside, nothing looked disturbed except the bathroom mirror. Someone had written 3 words across the fogged glass. "You left me." I packed my things and ran downstairs. The front desk was empty. The motel lobby lights were off. The only thing sitting on the counter was the guest register. My name was written on the last line. Directly beneath it was another signature. Same handwriting, same spelling, same room number. But the check-in time was listed as 2:07 a.m. I arrived before midnight. I left immediately and drove until sunrise. A week later, I called the motel to ask about the employee I'd seen on the monitor. The woman who answered said she'd worked there for 15 years. She told me they hadn't had a male employee in over a decade. Before hanging up, she asked one question that still keeps me awake. "Can I ask why you were looking at the security footage from room 214? I told her there wasn't any room 214. She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, "That's strange. Our motel only has 13 rooms. I've been a farmer my entire life, and I don't scare easily. But after what happened last October, I sold half my livestock and installed cameras everywhere. They didn't help. My farm sits almost 10 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by wheat fields and old fencing. Nothing unusual ever happens out there, except the occasional coyote or wandering deer. One Monday morning, I walked into the pasture to feed my cattle and noticed something odd. Every cow was standing together, staring toward the eastern fence, except one. It stood alone in the middle of the field, facing the exact opposite direction. Completely motionless. I yelled and clapped my hands, but it didn't move for almost 30 seconds. When it finally turned around, the entire herd suddenly scattered, as if they'd been frightened by something. I assumed an animal had wandered through during the night. The next morning, it happened again. The same cow, the same spot, facing away from the herd. This time I walked over to inspect the ground. There were footprints in the mud. Not hoof prints. Bare human footprints. They started at the fence and stopped exactly where the cow had been standing. There were no prints leading away. I told my neighbor, who laughed and said teenagers were probably messing with me. So that night, I left a trail camera pointed at the pasture. The next morning, I couldn't wait to check it. The recording showed the cattle peacefully grazing until 2:43 a.m. Then, without warning, every single animal stopped moving at the same time. They all turned toward the eastern fence. Nothing appeared on camera. For almost 3 minutes, they stood perfectly still. Then one cow slowly walked away from the herd and stopped in the middle of the field. It turned around and faced the darkness behind the camera. The recording ended. Not because the battery died, because the file simply stopped. I bought a better camera and aimed it from a different angle. That night I stayed awake in the farmhouse. At exactly 2:43 a.m., every dog on neighboring farms started barking. Then they all stopped together. The silence was worse. I looked out the kitchen window. The cattle were standing in a perfect line, all facing my house, except one. It was facing the barn. I grabbed a flashlight and walked outside. Halfway to the barn, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The barn door was already open. I was certain I'd locked it. Inside, nothing looked disturbed except for the dirt floor. Someone had drawn a huge circle using a shovel. In the center was my old wooden chair. I never kept a chair in the barn. As I backed away, I heard slow footsteps above me. The loft. I shined my flashlight upward. Nothing. Then dust drifted down as if someone had just taken a step. I left immediately and waited until sunrise before returning with my brother. The chair was gone. The circle had been erased. But my flashlight was lying in the center of the barn floor. Neither of us had gone back inside after I dropped it. We checked the security camera. The footage showed me entering the barn alone, then standing completely still in the middle of the room for nearly 18 minutes. I wasn't walking. I wasn't searching. I was just standing there, looking up. The camera had no audio, but my brother zoomed in on my face. My lips were moving. It looked like I was talking to someone in the loft. I have no memory of those 18 minutes. A week later, an older farmer from the next county came by after hearing my story. He didn't ask to see the cameras. He didn't ask about the footprints. He only asked one question. Did one cow always face the wrong direction? I nodded. He stared at the pasture for a long time before saying, "My grandfather warned me about that when I was a kid." I asked him what it meant. He simply walked back to his truck and said, "If the animals are watching something, don't be the first person to look." I never went into that pasture at night again. Last month, the new owner called me. He said the cameras keep failing every morning at exactly 2:43 a.m. Then he asked me something I'll never answer. Do you know why one of the cows keeps standing outside my bedroom window? It's facing the field instead of the house.